Welcome back to the class. Let us continue with discussion on Max Weber. We are almost halfway through in the discussion on Max Weber. In the previous class, we discussed his the most famous work of Max Weber, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, a book widely considered as as the most important contribution of Max Weber, in which he tried to explore a host of theoretical issues through a very fascinating empirical as well as historical analysis. I hope that you followed the class, you understood the argument, how he makes a connection between the rise of modern capitalism in Europe and a particular religious outlook or religious influence of what he calls it as a Protestant ethic, a particular worldview, a particular theological influence emerged from the Protestant groups, especially Calvinism, and influenced by others. So, as I mentioned in the class, this book is also widely seen as a dialogue between Karl Marx and Max Weber. And in today's class, we are moving to analyze yet another very important concept of Max Weber, known as bureaucracy. And we know that this term is a very familiar term. We use this term in our everyday practice. We come across bureaucracy. I don't think that any part of our existence, especially in the professional world as well as socio-economic as well as economic institutions, this word is something so important. We are a part of that, we contribute to that, we experience bureaucracy in our everyday life. We are sometimes critical of that, but yet we know that we can't really, quite often, we can't really, cannot do without a bureaucratic setup. So Weber has very interesting theorization on bureaucracy, especially its a historically unique character. It is very specific forms of rationality, its efficiency, the way in which it is organized, and of course he was also critical of that. So let us spend some time trying to understand Max Weber's exposition on bureaucracy. Weber was interested in bureaucracy as it is the purest type of exercise of legal authority in the modern world. And his interest in this setup or this arrangement of bureaucracy was not only emerging from his keen interest to understand this particular arrangement per se, but he argued that this really epitomizes, or this really represents the purest type of exercise of legal authority. And here we need to go back to the previous classes where we discussed about at least three major types of authority that Weber mentions about. One is the traditional authority, second one is the charismatic authority, and the third one is legal rational authority. I hope you remember the classes. If not, please go back and refer to those classes because they are extremely important. Weber talks about three major ideal types of authorities from where the legitimacy, the power derives its legitimacy. The one is from the traditional authority, where the tradition itself provides legitimacy to certain forms of behavior, certain authority, certain power. Second one is charismatic authority, emerging from the exceptional person, which breaks almost every existing rules about power and authority and other things. And the third one, the most important one for Weber, was the legal rational authority, where he elaborates its features. They are impersonal. It's based on it is uninfluenced by or uncontaminated by the elements of emotion or tradition and other things. So for Weber, bureaucracy really represents the purest form of exercise of legal authority. The process of modernization for Weber is a process of bureaucratization. Modern society is fundamentally and inevitably a bureaucratic society. And this is an extremely important argument because he is connecting modernization, okay, of course with a number of other themes, But for him, the most important feature of modernization is nothing but it's a process of bureaucratization. And Weber provides a much expansive understanding of bureaucratization, taking it from a very limited understanding about how state apparatus is bureaucratic, and that's how we understand it in our common parlance. But for Weber, this bureaucratization has permeated into each and every spheres of modern human society. That is why for him the process of modernization is nothing but, or it's also a process of bureaucratization. Modern society is fundamentally and inevitably bureaucratic society, and he would say that a modern society is incompatible with traditional values like tradition or charismatic authority, because there are quite a lot of inherent contradictions within the value orientations themselves. The state in particular, Weber emphasizes, is absolutely dependent upon a bureaucratic basis, and which we know that for sure how it exists. Every modern nation state is built on an elaborate, a gigantic system of bureaucracy, starting with maybe the chief secretary at the state level, to the representative of the state at the grassroots level, at the lowest level. The state enterprise is a mammoth bureaucratic enterprise. The growth of bureaucratic officialdom, he observes, has been the unambiguous yardstick of the modernization of the state. So this bureaucratic officialdom, where a particular set of, an exclusive set of officials, in the Indian context, we know the IAS officers are the epitome of Indian bureaucracy. That's you know the amount of competition involved, the extent of competition to clear civil service examinations, and the kind of prestige and power associated with the position of IAS, because they are considered to be the most important components of this bureaucratic system. So the growth of bureaucratic officialdom, he observes, has been the unambiguous yardstick of modernization of the state. So he would even analyze or evaluate the extent of modernization of a state on the basis of the extent of its bureaucratization. Weber's concept of bureaucracy is an ideal type, an abstraction constructed to underline the rational properties of bureaucratic administration and highlight the contrast between bureaucratic rule and traditional rule. And I hope you remember our discussion on ideal type. Weber gives a definition of ideal type, and he presents it as a methodological tool. He talks about historical ideal type and general ideal type. So in order to just have a very quick recap, he argues that you must be able to create an ideal type of a social phenomenon, either a historical event or a historical trait or a general ideal type, and this ideal type helps you as a perfect example, okay, against which you can compare the kind of examples that you have with you. And I gave you the example of in the previous class, I gave you the example of a perfect student. Okay, so we may not be able to point out somebody as a perfect student or the perfect student, but we all know that, or for that matter, a perfect leader or a perfect doctor. Okay, these are all examples of ideal type, where it helps us to evaluate an ordinary doctor or a student whom we meet in our everyday life, and then to compare it and then to contrast it and to see to what extent this particular person embodies the kind of qualities and features of this ideal type. And Weber is very clear that it's only purely an ideological, it's an ideal, it's a construct. It never exists. You will never find an ideal typical situation or category anywhere in reality. So Weber's concept of bureaucracy is an ideal type, an abstraction constructed to underline the rational properties of bureaucratic administration and highlight the contrast between bureaucratic rule and traditional rule. So if you contrast the functioning of bureaucratic rule or an ideal type of bureaucratic administration and an ideal type of traditional administration, you will see what are the kind of a contrasting differences, and that is the purpose of Weber in creating or in constructing this ideal typical construction. So what are the important features? Weber talks about the first one is a formalism. Bureaucracy exhibits a high level of formalism insofar as official business is conducted on the basis of written rules, administrative regulations and fixed procedures. The rational formalism of bureaucracy requires that the administrative actions be handled in a uniform fashion by the book, not on an individual case-by-case basis and not according to the personal predilections of bureaucratic officials. And this is something extremely important. And we know that when we talk about bureaucracy, it is supposed, we often attribute quite a lot of rigidity associated with that. We know that we have often heard that bureaucrats are supposed to follow the rules in a very strict manner. They are not supposed to deviate from that. So and they can't really take decisions on the basis of their own discretion. The discretionary powers of bureaucrats are very limited. It doesn't mean that they are completely absolutely not permitted, but the range of their discretion is very limited. Okay, so the important argument of Weber is that bureaucracy is characterized by formalism. Everything is well documented. There is no informality available, or there is no informality allowed. You are supposed to strictly follow the written and laid down rules. And those who are familiar with government services or private corporations and other things, we know that once you take up a particular job, our rules and our service conditions, for example, are strictly governed by very specific rules. What are we supposed to do? What are we not supposed to do? So each and every action is actually rule bound. So Weber argues that this formalism is a very important feature of bureaucracy. It exhibits a high level of formalism insofar as official business is conducted on the basis of written rules, administrative regulations and fixed procedures. And a number of examples. If you want to buy something, if it is say if it is below some 50,000 rupee, a particular officer can go ahead with that. But if it is between 50,000 and then 5 lakh, then that order must get ratified by his his superior. And if the order is beyond 5 lakh, then it must go to a purchase committee. So there are very specifically well laid out rules for each and every aspect. So that is why the rational formalism of bureaucracy requires that administrative actions be handled in a uniform fashion by the book, not on an individual case-by-case basis, and not according to the personal predilections of bureaucratic officials. And this is an extremely important point, because it is the chair of the bureaucrat which actually decides what are the rules and rules and other things that this particular officer is bound to follow. So it's the kind of a space provided, or the freedom provided to that particular officer per se is very limited. And keep it in mind, these are all ideal typical arguments. Okay, we know that that's not how it happens. You will come across officials who are more forthcoming, who flout the rules, who have a much larger understanding of the freedom associated. But for Weber, this is how he characterizes the essential features of bureaucracy. Then the second one is impersonality. Bureaucratic officials, Weber argues, in adherence to their vocational demands, perform their function in a purely objective and matter-of-fact manner, in accordance with the calculable rules and without regard to personal considerations. And this is another very important one. The first one we already discussed, it's formalism. Second one is impersonality. So the person who occupies a particular chair, a chair of a chief secretary or chair of a district collector, does not matter, because the chair requires, that position requires a person to behave in certain manner. Okay, a person cannot bring in his or her personal ideas, their proclivities, their ideological inclinations, their personal opinions, their biases. They are not supposed to bring that. Okay, they are supposed to purely follow the rules and regulations in a purely objective and matter-of-fact manner, in accordance with the calculable rules and without regard to personal considerations. Weber argues the more fully developed the bureaucracy, the more it is dehumanized. The more completely it succeeds in eliminating from official business love, hatred, and all purely personal, irrational, and emotional elements which escape calculation. The impersonality of the market economy has its counterpart in the impersonality of bureaucratic administration. So here Weber is elaborating with the impersonal character of bureaucracy. He says that the more it is bureaucratized, the more it is dehumanized. It is supposed to have been free from all human character, because when you are sitting on a chair and a file comes to you about a particular person's plight, and you are really convinced about the situation of that particular person, you really want to help, but then there could be some technical glitch, there could be some technical problem which prevents you from doing that, and then you are supposed to follow the technical rule. Okay, so Weber or a host of other scholars have argued that a completely absolute bureaucratic system is a completely dehumanized one. You will not find any human qualities. You will not find any space for any human qualities of love or compassion or generosity or or adjustment, or these qualities do not have any place in a bureaucratic setup. So the more it completely succeeds in eliminating from official business love, hatred, and all purely personal, irrational, and emotional elements which escape calculation. The impersonality of the market economy has its counterpart in the impersonality of bureaucratic administration. So he argues that when capitalism emerges, it assumes the character of a completely impersonal market economy, because market or economy, according to Weber, is yet another form of completely or complete absolute rational behavior. Then the third one is predictability. Bureaucracy, Weber states, permits a high degree of calculability of results, both for those heading the organization and for those who acting in relation to that. You know how bureaucratic organizations work. So it actually gives you a sense of certainty over the organization, a sense of predictability over the organization. For example, if a chief secretary issues an order, the chief secretary exactly knows that how that it has to be circulated, when will it reach the lower bottom person, and how it will be implemented, because he knows how this system of bureaucracy functions. So there is an important element of calculability in that, because the rules are well laid out, the hierarchy is well laid out, the flow of information is clearly well established. So all these things actually produce a kind of calculability, a kind of predictability, high degree of calculability of results, both of these heading the organization and for those who acting in relation to it. The capitalist market economy depends on the existence of a stable and predictable governing system, and this is precisely what bureaucratic administration offers. So the capitalist market economy depends on the existence of a stable and predictable governing system. I hope you remember this point when Weber talks about the structural conditions for the emergence of capitalism. We came across this point that every business, every capitalist would require a stable set of rules. Okay, there could be some changes here and there, but everybody wants a stable political atmosphere. No investor will be willing to invest their money if he or she knows that the political climate is going to be chaotic in a place. They want complete stability, at least clarity in terms of the legal and political provisions of that particular place. Another the fourth important feature that Weber talks about is knowledge. Rationality of bureaucracy derives also from its reliance on a staff consisting of knowledgeable professionals and technical specialists. And this division of labor on the basis of the knowledge. And we know that usually we say that people are appointed on the basis of their efficiency. Okay? People are appointed on the basis of their efficiency, and in a modern industrial advanced society, we know that we have extreme form of division of labor, people who have specialized in some of the most narrow fields of specialization. So bureaucracy, Weber argues, is based on highly specialized forms of knowledge. The rationality of bureaucracy derives also from its reliance on a staff consisting of knowledgeable professionals. So an ordinary lay person is not entrusted with the role of with the task of bureaucracy, but it's for knowledgeable professionals and technical specialists. The process of bureaucratization gives rise to a social order characterized by the ever-increasing importance of experts and specialized knowledge, and by an absolute and complete dependence on a specially trained organization of officials. So it's a group of people who have expertise in a given area, and this organization is hierarchically arranged. The flow of communication is well decided, well defined, and all these characteristics really shape what it means to be a bureaucratic, a system of bureaucracy. Gives rise to a social order characterized by the ever increasing importance of experts and specialized knowledge, and by an absolute and complete dependence on a specially trained organization of officials. Bureaucratic administration, Weber states, means fundamentally domination through knowledge. And this knowledge, we know that in modern state, this knowledge gets manifested through technical knowledge, through data that you collect about the people, the kind of legal and political components of the rules that are already framed, then a host of forms of knowledge about the administrative system, its various components, its various dynamics, and a lot of other stuff. So the fifth point that Weber brings forward is that of efficiency. Okay, an office hierarchy consisting of well-defined channels of authority and lines of supervision, and the presence of a trained staff of career officials with a specialized areas of competence. So bureaucracy presents you with utmost clarity in terms of the organizational structure. Okay, there won't be two officials having the same position. There the kind of a conflict of interest is never allowed. The authority structure, who is superior to whom and who is subordinate to whom, these rules are very clearly laid out. Okay, so the flow of communication, who has to issue a notice and how it has to be routed. We know that a letter is routed through somebody. So even if it is intended to somebody, it has to be routed through. When a principal writes a letter to a faculty member, so it has to be routed through the head of the department. Okay? Even if that letter is directly addressed to a faculty member, it has to be routed through the head of the department, because head of the department is seen as superior to that of the faculty and seen as somebody who is in between the faculty and the principal. Okay, so an official hierarchy consisting of well-defined channels of authority and lines of supervision and also lines of communication, and by the presence of a trained staff of career officials with specialized areas of competence. So they insist, they ensure continuity, stability, reliability, and consistency. Okay, each of them are very important: continuity, stability, reliability, and consistency. The human, it becomes a kind of a human machine. It's a machine composed of human beings. It's a well-oiled machinery. It's supposed to be very efficient. It's supposed to be very continuous, stable, reliable, and consistent. And I don't think that I need to remind you that when it comes to this point, we know that increasingly know that it's an ideal type, because bureaucracy, at least in India, is also quite often associated with lack of efficiency. Okay, we say that our bureaucratic enterprise is completely inefficient. It is corrupt. It's full of nepotism. It's full of lazy officials who don't do that. It's the best way of getting things delayed. If you don't want to give to somebody, then the best way is to route it through the kind of a bureaucratic enterprise. If you give a complaint to somebody or a petition to the government officials, it will be kept somewhere. It will accumulate dust for years or together. So, but we know that Weber is not talking about the exact condition. Weber is not talking about the empirical condition. Rather, he is talking about the ideal, typical condition. And the next important feature is indispensability. Bureaucracy, the purest embodiment of formal rationality, is an indispensable feature of modern society. It's a uniquely efficient mechanism for administering collective affairs of society. So Weber would even argue that you don't have anything to replace bureaucracy. Do we have anything to replace the system of bureaucracy? Have you thought about anything? Can you think of anything that can replace bureaucracy? We say that it's very corrupt, it's very inefficient, it's full of favoritism and then red tapeism. But do we have anything, any other alternative forms of organization that can be used to to replace bureaucracy? It's impossible. We have not found anything so far. We can make the bureaucracy less cluttered, less rigid and more flexible. That's all fine. But this overall logic of this organization, the overall logic of this arrangement, it's very hard to replace that. Bureaucracy, Weber argues, is escape proof and practically indestructible. So Weber is extremely clear about it. He's very clear that you can't really do away, you can wish away bureaucracy because it epitomizes some of the essential features of modern society. So it's not that you can't replace bureaucracy with something else. He says that it is impossible in a modern era because this modernity is characterized by some of the important values that are inherent in a bureaucratic system, all these values that we discussed. So in a traditional society, in a tribal society or in a feudal society, you can think of other forms of organization, but in a modern society where rationality is the most important form of value, you can't have any other value or any other system of governance other than bureaucracy. So Weber, while Weber is ambivalent about its social and personal effects. So as I mentioned, while Weber brings forth all these it's a comma here. So while Weber is ambivalent about its social and personal effects, he sees the professional feature of professional bureaucrat chained by his apparatus, as once established bureaucracies are difficult to abolish. So Weber, while understands that it is an inescapable situation, he is also familiar with the kind of a negative images or negative aspects of bureaucracy. Because I don't think that any society people are the system of bureaucracy is free of criticism. Everywhere when you have such a inhuman mechanism in place, when people are appointed to very important positions and when they wield so much of power, then the system is bound to become lethargic, the system is bound to become corrupt. So he is ambivalent about the social and personal effects. He sees the professional bureaucrat chained by his apparatus. As once established, bureaucracies are very difficult to abolish. And you also must be knowing quite a lot of stuff about say many bureaucrats feeling fed up with the whole system and they coming out of the whole system and feeling and thinking that they can do far better if they are outside of this bureaucratic setup. Moreover, the bureaucracy can work for anyone in control of it, whether it may be democratically elected leader or a dictator. This is another very important point. So we cannot assume that bureaucracy, because of its all efficiency and other thing, will always have positive effects. Okay? You can have an extremely ruthless bureaucratic system who will silently obey its most ruthless leader. And the German Holocaust, the way in which the Nazis executed the final solution, stands a testimony to that. Even now, researchers are really wondering how that ordinary human beings, you must have heard about this argument of this banality of evil. Okay, the famous argument by Anna Hannett. So, see, she talks about how an ordinary police person can become so ruthless in killing ordinary people. Okay, so how a policeman in the German Nazi group, how he does not think critically, how he's not thinking critically, and then in a mechanical manner or in a very efficient manner, you know, execute, kill, put people into gas chambers and then kill thousands of people per day. So this bureaucratic system, while it can be quite efficient, it can be quite efficient in the negative sense as well. So that is why then this whole system of the whole set of criticism as red tapeism and dehumanizing nature and other things, and Weber acknowledges that, a host of other scholars also acknowledge that it's an inhuman system, that if you don't you have heard quite a lot of stories about that. If somebody is in a, even if it's a very situation which requires urgent intervention in a bureaucratic system, it simply will not work. It has to pass through the very specific stages. It has to go through from one officer to the other, and then finally by the time the order comes, the needy person might have died, or so an efficient and speedy speedy decision making with compassion, decision making with discretion, these things are not the hallmark of bureaucracy. And this whole issue of nepotism, red tapeism, favoritism, corruption, all these things are part of bureaucracy. Okay, but once again, Weber's argument, Weber's concern is that bureaucracy, it epitomizes all the important values and features of a modern society, and you can't really help. As long as you have modern legal rational authority in place, its system of execution has to be bureaucracy and nothing else. Okay, so let us stop here and we'll meet for the next class.